Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Make sure you're finding us out on the radio dial, setting a spot for us out on the Beltway here. It is a big week. Traffic's up, people's up, people reaching to me all over the place. I'm going to Buffalo. It's going to be cold. I know all of that stuff. Luke Jones will be out in Owings Mills all week. All of that brought to you by our friends at Curio Wellness as well as Liberty Pure Solutions. We're going to get the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back at the Libs Grill on February the 10th. And a cup of soup or bowl kicks off. We're going to be feeding some local food pantries in early February during Super Bowl week. We are going to be at Coco's Pub. I'm wearing my Coco's Pub shirt. We're going to be there on Wednesday. And no finer cream of crab soup than Coco's Pub down in Lauraville. John Wawrow covers all things Buffalo sports. That includes the Sabres and oftentimes the Bills, maybe a little Bisons as well from time to time. And he has been a defending champion on this program, but not since the Zoom era and the video era and all that. He does all of this for the Associated Press. You can find him at ap.org. Download the Associated Press app, which he told me about in the beginning, and I'm like, trusted news. We all need a little bit of that. I am an old newspaper guy as well, so I love having on people that do who, what, where, why, when. And I know why we're in Buffalo because the Ravens lost a couple of games, but man, it doesn't get much better than this, right? I mean, you're at this a long time up in Buffalo. I've been down here where you have the best quarterback. No, we have the best quarterback. Oh, we have the better team. This is a really, really fun football game for the whole league, I think, on Sunday.
Well, thanks for having me on, Nestor. And I agree. I mean, it's a great matchup. And a lot of questions might be answered, may not be answered. A lot of people's wishes may be fulfilled. I'm not sure, but I'm looking forward to see how the Bills respond, um, particularly after the way they lost in Week 4 against Baltimore, and with all the underlying subplots of Lamar versus Josh, this team's better, or what have you. I'm curious to see how this all unveils on Sunday in what is the latest big matchup here in Buffalo. And there's some narratives also that need to be addressed because let's face it, as much pressure as as much criticism has been heaped on Sean McDermott, the Bills coach, for not getting over the playoff hump, I think the same thing goes towards Harbaugh because of where the Ravens are. So one team is going to at least advance, likely face the Chiefs, who I mean, that's not much of a consolation prize to face potentially the two-time defending Super
Either
Bowl
one will still be
champion
a 4-point
next week.
underdog in Kansas City next week, right? I mean,
Right,
literally.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. So, there's so many intriguing subplots to this, given the history, given the quarterbacks, given the coaches who coached together in Philly. So, I'm up for this.
How many years have you been doing Buffalo sports now, John?
Since 2000. So this is it's going to be my 25th anniversary in about 6 weeks.
Yeah,
So
I've been telling a
I've
story
seen a
all week
lot.
long. Yeah, I know you've been there a long time, and I predate that in Buffalo. I was at the Art Shell, Jay Schrader, K
Oh
Gun,
boy.
Marcher, bro. I mean, I was at that game. The Bills make me want to shout. I think it was born that year, and we're 4 decades later. And I was not at the Norwood game, but I was in Rasig's living room watching the wide right and all of that. And all these years later, all the indignities and the 17 years of not making the playoffs. I feel like watching it from afar, and I come to Buffalo almost once a year. I mean, I come through, I have lunch with my buddy Mike Sprata. I usually drive across the Peace Bridge. I'm on my way to Toronto for Getty
Right.
Lee or something like that. But I always make it a point to spend a little time in Buffalo, see folks there. I have great affinity for everything from Cheektowaga and Lackawanna to Depew and Amherst and all the way up to North Tonawanda, where they need to reopen Nestor's Red Hots up there near the Carousel Museum. But I even eat beef on Weck sometimes when I'm at Wegmans, just to honor you guys and drink a Labatt's whenever it's available. I feel awful that you guys haven't won. I told the story earlier to one of your Buffalo compadres that when the Hasek incident happened against Dallas, I was at New
Sure.
York, in Las Vegas, sixth period of hockey, and you got cheaped out in a game 6 in the Madonna, the whole deal. I mean, I know all of the indignities as a longtime sports fan. I've had 2 parades. I've written a couple of championship books here. We had the Orioles when I was a kid. Like, I'm pretty fulfilled if it never happens again. I mean, I even lifted the Stanley Cup with Ovechkin and Barry Trotz in Vegas. Like,
Nice.
I'm good. y'all aren't good. And I just, for while we're Sig's in his 70s for crying out loud. Balani's coming on this week. I don't want you to beat us, but I want you to win. I just want you to know that from me to you.
Well, would it be? Homerism or whatever aside, I mean, I think it would be fascinating to see the Bills and Lions play in the Super Bowl because somebody's going to end a long time drought. It might happen, it may not, but I think that the curiosity factor for these two Rust Belt towns that I'm very much familiar with, having grown up in Windsor, Ontario, would be fascinating. But I'm not sure what kind of a fascinating draw it might be on TV. But I think Bills, Lions in New Orleans might be a really cool thing to cover.
Wow, Windsor, Ontario, no stranger to the Lindell AC, I
That's
assume.
correct. Yes.
Absolutely, I like that. John Wawrow is our guest. He's at the Associated Press. I had to stand up once you start talking about Buffalo in this way. For the franchise and for putting this together, you've witnessed the bad times. I mean, I remember coming up there and Marshawn Lynch was running around or not, and things weren't good. Different coaches, Rex, my boy Schwartzy was up there running around with the defense for a little while. John Bon Jovi trying to pirate the team off to Toronto right up to QEW.
Yep.
For you, with this turnaround and this recency of ownership, general manager, head coach, and most importantly, the quarterback that kind of makes it all go. This has been an incredible thing to see that stadium get erected in the middle of the parking lot, which is really impeding tailgating, as I pointed out all week in Orchard Park. But I mean, I'm pleased to see this for your community, and it certainly wasn't willed that way, right? I mean, every part of this is hard fought in Buffalo.
Well, it has been though. I will say Pinto Ron is still doing his tailgate in Hammer's Lot, so you still get the full Pinto experience
What does
with the
that mean?
Munster.
You jump off the RVs?
Well, there's that, but he's very renowned. I mean, he's got the Pinto, an old Pinto that he hauls around, and he cooks food in there. You get the bowling ball shot, and then usually at 11:30 on 1 o'clock games, he gets sprayed with mustard and ketchup. It's been a thing. He hasn't missed a game. I think in five. I think he's gone to
How does he
500
rinse off?
consecutive
I'm just
games.
asking.
I have no clue because I'm usually in the press box by
You're a
that time. So I
reporter. Come
don't know.
on, man. I'm coming to you. You're the source, John. Come on.
But to really answer your question, I've witnessed a lot of dysfunction over that 17-year playoff drought, and there was a sense of difference, a sense of professionalism that entered the equation when Sean McDermott arrived in 2017, and followed by Brandon Beane a few months later. They both work together in Carolina, and they have the symmetry that I think Baltimore Ravens fans are very accustomed to in seeing how that front office has worked with Harbaugh over the years. They're on the same page. There's a professionalism about it. It's not about marketing, which too often was the problem in Buffalo over that 17-year drought. This is all about football and making football decisions, and we've seen it. I'm not sure if the Bills are if Bean and McDermott are going to say they lucked out on Josh Allen because of how that 2018 draft fell, but they worked hard to put themselves in a position to get that number 7 pick and land on Josh, who has really transformed the franchise.
Well, he was a mixed bag the day he was drafted, right? Like everyone
Oh,
else. He was
geez.
seven. He was
Oh,
7 for a reason. The same way Lamar was 32 for a reason.
right, exactly. And Bills fans were adamantly against the Bills drafting Josh Allen. And everybody, I always take the approach, as I have over the years. I want to get to know the guy. I want to get to see the guy in the field. I've seen a lot of busts come through Buffalo before that, and I want to see what Josh Allen was. And interestingly enough, both Ravens and Bills fans got a chance to their first glimpse of both making their NFL debut in that god awful 47-3 2018 opener in which Peterman, sorry, the Bills starter threw like 18 interceptions through the first half, and they didn't get a first down. And so you've got Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson making their NFL debuts in mop-up roles in the same game, and look how far they've come. but I've watched Josh Allen mature as a quarterback, and just as important as a leader of this team. This year is his team. Say what you will about the MVP vote and all that, but this is Josh Allen playing at his best, even though the numbers don't entirely reflect that. But this is a Josh Allen led team, unquestioned.
John Wawrow covers the Buffalo Bills and all things Buffalo sports at the Associated Press. You can find him. Please download the AP app. Good news is hard to find, and real news is more important than ever. Beginning right around lunchtime on Monday. For for well, yeah,
Yeah, I hear
yeah.
you.
I'm
I
happy
hear
to be
you.
talking about football this week. That's all I'm going to say as an opiate for my masses. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. You mentioned MVP. I'm not the phone call guy anymore, and I never was that. The whole nasty Nestor shtick has been well worn. And but in the modern era, the notion that it would be a mudslinging thing in one way or another, all I've said, and I said this to Brandon Stokely earlier in the week, because he caught some touchdowns around here, worked for Art Modell for a period of time, and we lost David Modell 8 years ago this week, and I was honoring him, who was a really good man. And a sports guy who never lied to me, which as a reporter, you and I would both say that's the
Sure,
hardest thing in the world to find is somebody that's never lied to you. And they've left us, and when they've left us, I honor those people the most. If Art and David called me and said, "How are the Ravens doing?" I'm like, "Well, they're going to Buffalo and playing a game, and well, tell me about the team." And I'd say, "Art, they have a running back." He'd say, "Who's he like?" And I'd say, "Art, Jim Brown." He'd say,
sure.
"What? There's never been a Jim Brown. There'd never be another." And they'd say, "Well, tell me about the quarterback." I'm like, "Well, Art, you'll love the fact that he's African American because you were always the one hiring Ozzie Newsome. Art was on the front end of all of that before the late '60s, and
Right.
when it wasn't cool, and George Preston Marshall was not making it cool, and." But if I said, "Well, tell me about his statistics," I'd be like, "Well, he's thrown 41 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, Art. What? Does he run? Does he fumble?" And I'm like, "No, he ran for 900 yards this year, Art." Like, I mean, I don't, and we're not, Art's only been dead the decade. I mean, the game hasn't changed that much, but boy, has the game changed with one player who's doing something that even when I just give you his stats, forget anybody else. If I just give you that, how can he not be the MVP? And then
Right.
I would also make the case against that as saying I am the biggest Derrick Henry guy there is. I'm the guy who's always sharing my statuses from 2 and 3 years ago, saying if they ever got Derrick Henry, they would be unstoppable. Where this year they've got this other thing that makes them really unstable. It'd be really a shame if they don't win because to some degree, I don't think it could get any better than this because they're not going to get better than Derrick Henry. And they're never going to enter January as healthy as they are right now as a unit.
I totally get that. And yes, and what really impressed me as I started doing my research on the Ravens earlier this morning, and I've not done a lot of it yet, so I'm just in the early stages, but that this team has topped 300 yards offense all season long in all 18 games, including playoffs. And the Bills haven't done that. The Bills didn't do that. Their worst game was against Baltimore with 236 yards. But even the Bills have not done that. And it shows what Derrick Henry has done to that offense in really taking part of the load off Lamar. And I like Lamar. And I mean, he's a different quarterback than Josh Allen in some ways, but he gets the job done. And both are challenged with the question of playoff success. Obviously, Lamar and Josh Allen have met once before in 2020 with Jackson throwing that interception that Taron Johnson returned 101 yards. You know, this is why this whole thing's intriguing because there's narratives, there's all this, and they're really good players. They're not going to face each other, but I think that there is an underlying undercurrent that one wants to best the other, and that we're going to find out what the competitive drive is of both teams who have a lot of pride on the line. I will say this: I think the Bills have an edge in being discounted. I think that is a big motivating factor going into this weekend because of the All Pro vote, because of all the MVP talk, because I just looked at the BetMGM odds, and
They
now
switched. Yeah,
The
they
Ravens
flipped.
are now more, yeah, are favored. The Bills were fifth. They were tied with the Ravens last week. I that don't discount the dismissed um, part. The Bills love to be dismissed, and they've been dismissed a lot this year. They flew under the radar, especially if you go back to spring, where they lost six of eight captains, traded Stephon Diggs to Houston, lost Gabe Davis, and it's like, who's going to be running this offense? Well, they won 13 games for the fifth time in franchise history and third time since 2020 with all these moving parts that happen. This is a team that I think probably doesn't deserve a lot of all pro votes to begin with. Maybe, Josh, James Cook, you can't make the case for James Cook because you've got Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley. So I totally get that. Perhaps the one under the radar guy on the defense has been Christian Benford, who's developing into one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. So I get that, but the Bills love to be dismissed. They love to be overlooked. And I think that a lot of people were picking Denver for some reason last week. I don't know why, but it just didn't match up. I get how tight this game is, how tight the line is on this game, and why the Ravens are favored. Um, but I just have the, but look out, look out. I think this is going to be one heck of a game.
John Wawrow is here from the Associated Press. He covers all things Buffalo sports. We're not going to talk Sabres in this one. I promise you that.
Oh, let's not. No, no,
Let's
no.
not do that. Last couple things for you.
Yep.
The big discrepancy in the 25 points at 35-10 and where they were. Milano, you
Yep.
mentioned Terry John, being able to get defenders back on the field. It's ancient history. It's a long time ago, but it was a pretty nasty beatdown. And there's the point where the Bills have had to own that as well. And in the end, it's 18 degrees up at your place. It's going to be a hellhole. By the time kickoff happens up there, by the time it happens, if Houston pulls off a miracle, that could host a championship game. I mean, just all of it lathers up, but the defense and how much better the defense is going to need to be against the way this offense is running right now, with or without Zay Flowers.
Without question. Without question. I mean, and that is one of the more frightening things to go up against. I do remember still seeing that the opening quarter of that week 4 game, and the Ravens did. There was a lot of questions about the Ravens because they opened the season, I think, with 2 losses against good teams, but there are a lot of questions about who the Ravens were. And I remember the Ravens coming out and really just punching the Bills in the mouth through that first quarter, including that 87-yard run by Derrick Henry. The Bills were not prepared at all. And I'm curious, and that's why I'm curious to see how the Bills respond to that, because the formula for their success was apparent in how they beat the Lions back in December. They smacked the Lions in the mouth to open that game. The defense did. They forced 2 punts and allowed Josh Allen and the offense to get a 14-point lead, much like the Ravens did to the Bills in week 4. And I'm curious to see if that intensity and that lesson is learned going into this game, because I don't think the Bills are going to be underprepared. And you brought up the weather. I think that's going to be a bit of an equalizing factor, because the Bills are accustomed to this. Are the Ravens? I'm not sure.
Tackling Derrick Henry's everything, though, right? I mean,
Sure. Oh,
down and
definitely.
distance.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as I said, from a strategy standpoint, this is a weird football game that's going to be the modern era, especially with these two teams, where fourth and anything might go from almost anywhere. There's not going to be a whole lot
Right.
of punting, not going to be a whole lot of field goals.
Right.
You're not going to, when it's 4th and 6 on the 32-yard line, Harbaugh's not going to say, let's send Tucker out for a 49-yard. He's going to say, let's go get 6 yards. And they're
Yep.
going to be 4th and 6 because sacks, fumbles, falling on the football, and more than anything for the Ravens, they just can't stop getting penalized. And the offensive line has put them into, I mean, as great as their offense has been, as historic DVOA, all that stuff, my God, if they just didn't have penalties, it would be crazy because they would really be in 1st and 10 instead of 1st and 15, 20, 25, which we've
Sure.
seen so many times this year. They led the world in penalties. I mean, they lost a couple games because of it, because they just, once you're at 1st and 25, I mean, you're asking them to do magic that even Lamar and King Henry can't pull off. But in 1st and 10, and especially on first down when they're gashing you and you're in 2nd and 1 and 2nd and 2, they're going to eat you all day long, especially in the cold when you don't want to tackle.
Well, no, and I totally get that, and I think the presence of Taron Johnson and Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard will help that defense from a run stopping in a when it comes to run stopping. Will improve it. Now, the Bills are very familiar with Derrick Henry because they played him. They played him at least once a season. I want to say going back to 2020. He's gashed them a few times, but the Bills have had his number. However, that was on a Tennessee Titans team that was one dimensional. I see the Bills bailing out to stop the run and forcing Lamar Jackson to beat him with his arm, and make this a track meet if they can, or have Josh Allen as they did against the Broncos produce 11, 12, 13 play drives to eat up the clock. It's going to be tough to do against the Ravens defense, but there are formulas for the Bills to win here. And again, I just go back to I want to see how this game plays out because they're two coaches who know each other, who know how to defend and defend against each other too. I think this actually, you mentioned special teams. I think this game comes down to special teams. And the Ravens have the advantage because the Bills' special teams have had their many deficiencies this year, including Tyler Bass being missing 5 extra point attempts already this season. So
I can't
this
imagine
really,
the Bills losing a game at home because of a kick. I mean, that would just,
they did it last year against Kansas City.
sure.
With Bass, although it was with a minute and 30 left, and Bass missed a 36, 40-yard field goal attempt to tie the game. But that, I think, is aside from stopping Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson, special teams is where everybody's holding their breaths every time the Bills' special teams units are on the field.
John Wawrow covers Buffalo sports for the Associated Press. We highly recommend you download the app, and he's been doing it a long time, quarter of a century up there in Buffalo. But I don't want to say it's the biggest game. I don't, if there's such thing, but it really does feel like it's a crescendo thing building in your community as much as, and I do talk about how different Buffalo is in regard to it being like Alabama for college football or whatever it would be, where it's this civic pride and frenzy in a way that it was here when the Ravens first got here, that it's just quite frankly not anymore after the Wembley knee and 2 ownerships, and we're on our 3rd championship run here. I think when you've never won, it's different. And you mentioned Detroit and some other places, but Detroit's different than being from Buffalo. As you well know, it's a different kind of community. And I did a lot of, we would call it civic therapy radio here on Monday mornings after tough losses. You know what I mean? That would be the civic therapy that will be necessary if Buffalo doesn't get it done there. It's tough being from Buffalo.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing on Monday. So, I mean, last week I predicted a blowout, so I knew this was coming. So, but we're at that point of the state. We're at that point of the playoffs where, especially in the AFC, where it's 3 teams. Um, one year was Cincinnati, but now it's Baltimore, Buffalo, and Kansas City. Um, and you just never know what's going to happen. And I love this time of year. And I'm like I said, I'm curious to see what things are gonna be like at say, what is it, 9 o'clock, 9:30 Sunday night.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. John Wawrow will be there. He'll be bundled up in the warmth. But then, in the old stadium, you got to go outside to even get down to the locker room. So
Yes.
hey, I mean, You got to be hard to even be a journalist in Buffalo, right?
Well, let's face. I mean, the press box windows aren't. They're not double panes, so we can feel the
Oh, it's
cold
cold.
coming through.
Yeah.
So,
I had that in Denver at the Mile High Miracle game. Listen, I had heaters in my boots in the press box.
right.
In a new stadium, it was that cold that day. I mean, it was zero. It was really, really cold. So I know what that's like. And that was my whole thing about 18 degrees on Sunday night. I said if it was 38, I'd go. 18's like different level cold. It really is.
Well, let's remember, and Ryan Fitzpatrick, the Bills, the longtime quarterback who's played for numerous teams, including the Bills, he's going to be leading the charge. They just announced on Sunday.
He's the legend of the game. I like that. Okay.
Yes, he's the legend of the game, and he's legendary for during when the Bills not beat the Patriots in the wild card round in 2021. I want to say just beat them down. They scored on every possession. It was 47-14 or something like that. And it was the year Fitz retired, and he brought his kids to the game. And in the fourth quarter, he was out there, although in the section that has heaters over above, but he was out there in, I believe, 3-degree temperatures with his shirt off, cheering along. So
That's how you
yes,
make it on TV and get commercials these days. When you know.
well, Ryan's always been a character from my days and one of the favorite guys that I've ever covered. So God bless him, it came naturally.
Well, yeah, he was an Ed Block Award winner who did my show when he came in here. You always got to
Yeah,
get the Harvard guys on. When you get the Harvard
right.
guys on, you always feel like you've made the show a little smarter. You know what I mean? So John Wawrow is here.
Well,
He's
that
a
didn't
Buffalo.
happen today. So there you
Well,
go.
right. If he's a Buffalo guy, so you Buff State, where'd you go? I don't know. I'm making that up.
No, I'm Canadian. So there you
Oh, that's
go.
all. You're Canadian, so
Yep.
that's no wonder you're so well educated and
Oh, please.
liberated. Well, we all need to know one of you at this point. So after Monday, I can at least say I got a friend. Um, have I mentioned how much I love Geddy Lee? No, John Wawrow is here, and I was going to make some Windsor Canadian ballet joke about what the Tigers and the baseball players used to say to me when they went into Detroit to the Lindell AC. But great football ahead. We've had some great, great conversations. I want to appreciate everybody in Buffalo, all my friends up there that have participated this week, Vic Carucci and others, and Brandon Stokely's been on this week as well. Luke's out in Owings Mills. If there's any breaking news, you'll get it first on the WNST Baltimore Positive Tech Service. That is all brought to you by Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy. We're getting the Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. Might actually be after the Super Bowl, but we are doing a Cup of Soup or Bowl week. I got my Cocos on. We're confirmed. We're kicking it off at Costas on Monday the 3rd in the main bar. Soup Bowl, bring out some canned goods and some great stuff. We're going to feed some folks during a very challenging time of the year. And maybe the Ravens will be in the Super Bowl 2 weeks from now. I'm Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore Positive.